Hi, people, welcome to the channel. Chances are this will be a provocative title, and in a sense, that's because I'm doubling down. I feel strongly about this, and Farage says he's doubling down on this. He's not backtracking on anything he said, so neither am I. I very much doubt he will be looking at this video, but certainly some of his supporters will be, and in a sense, it's them that I am addressing. Because all the excuses that are made are utterly pathetic and they just don't stack up. Just for context here, Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, which by some polls is now polling second only to Labour, um, came out and said that the West provoked Russia and therefore the West is to blame for the war in Ukraine. Um, he did condemn the invasion, technically, but he's been widely condemned. I share that condemnation. I think his position is disgusting. And it absolutely is appeasement. Absolutely 100% appeasement. Because if you really break this down and think of the implications of what Farage is saying, it essentially amounts to don't stand up to tyrants, don't stand up to dictators, don't stand up to bullies, just let them do what they want. Because if you stand up to them, you might provoke them. That's what Farage is saying. It's a point of absolute weakness and it shows its true colours. I'm just going to read out a piece from today's I newspaper, the reports by Jim Merrick Ardsing and Chloe Chaplin. And this isn't at all surprising. Nigel Farage has been hailed by pro-Russian government news organisations for claiming that the West provoked Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine. The Reform UK leader said yesterday he had been right to say that Western governments had played into Putin's hands after telling a BBC interview that we provoked this war. Despite his insisting he is not an apologist or supporter of the president, Russian state-owned and Kremlin-supporting websites welcomed Mr Farage's comments, saying he had refused to hide the truth about what Moscow calls a special military operation in Ukraine. His remarks, in which he suggested NATO and EU expansion had contributed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have attracted criticism across the UK political spectrum. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who has described the UK's support for Ukraine as one of the key achievements of his premiership, described Mr Farage's comments as nauseating, a historical drivel, and more Kremlin propaganda. One of these very rare occasions I find myself agreeing with Johnson. That's a good way to put it, actually. The Russian state-owned Gazeta website quoted the council's communications chief Alexei Pushkov as saying Mr Farage was not afraid to speak directly about the causes of the Ukrainian crisis and blame NATO. Speaking to ITV for the leader interviews airing at 7 p.m. tonight, Mr Farage said he supported giving munitions to Ukraine, but criticised what he said was a lack of sensible, substantive negotiations. Well, what's Russia's version of peace? Russia's version of peace is that Ukraine give up a massive chunk of its territory. In fact, Russia doesn't even recognize Ukrainian sovereignty, right? So Farage has to accept that if there's to be any peace in Ukraine, Russia's demands are utterly and wholly unrealistic. That's why Russia didn't attend that summit in Switzerland. And granted, that summit was never going to go very far, but the point about it is Russia's demands are wholly unrealistic. Now, war's a horrible thing. I hope that there can be peace in Ukraine, but I think peace at any price is ludicrous, because it would be a betrayal of the tens of thousands of Ukrainian men and women and children who have died. Um, I mean, the echoes of history in this are incredible, and I don't want to rehash that point too much, but I really, really do think we have big echoes of the 30s here. Farage is absolutely an appeaser because his position is don't stand up to tyrants. Let them do what they want, because if we stand up to them, we provoke them. Now, he can't put it any other way. That is what he said. He said the West provoked Russia. Um, I suppose technically he's right to say that Russia will find any excuse. Putin will find any excuse for what he does, but that doesn't mean you just let him have it. I mean, that is a cardly position to take. But Farage shares this with his his friend Donald Trump, who unfortunately will probably return to the White House. And I really, I really think American leadership right now. I mean, Biden is clearly looking his age. Trump is an absolute shit. I mean, that's putting it politely. Um, I want to throw up when I think of what Trump has said on Ukraine. That was a genius move by Putin on the day of the invasion. And more recently, Putin can do whatever the hell he likes regarding NATO funding. Um, in some ways, Farage is Britain's Trump. There are differences between them, but the man's a carnival barker. Even before this, I never had much time for Farage because I think he's a political opportunist who doesn't really want to take much responsibility. He's a rabble rouser, he's a populist, and I'm not totally against populism. Populism has a place, it certainly does. Indeed, I can be called a populist in some ways with my views on crime. But I also believe in responsibility. And my issue with Nigel Farage is he stirs things up. He says we need a revolution. Look at Brexit. The, the way he spoke about that was it was a British revolution. And yet, 4 years on, he's talking about a revolution again. He got what he wanted. We've got Brexit. And now he won't take responsibility for it. Pros and cons. Um, I am not convinced that Brexit has been the glowing triumph they claimed it would be. It hasn't been a total disaster either, but it hasn't been an absolute triumph. We certainly haven't taken back control the way Farage and co promised. Anyway, there's op-ed in Burrell. I don't always agree with him, but he's right on this. If I could just get that. My view, in Burrell, he's called Farage an enemy of Ukraine's democracy. He's absolutely right. Farage seems to have realised backing Putin propaganda was a mistake. Well, I don't know about that. He's doubling down, but there's op-ed. Um, you know, there were people who attack me because they say I'm taking Farage out of context. Not at all. I've quoted the things he's directly said. He said he doesn't like Putin as a person, but he admires him. Now, that is very explicit. That is what he said. He doesn't like Putin as a person, but he admires him as a leader for what he's been able to do in Russia. Well, what's he been able to do in Russia? Control that country with an iron fist, poison opponents, throw dissidents in prison. I don't know, maybe Farage has some delusions of being a British dictator, another Oliver Cromwell, perhaps. Um, I mean, certainly his friend Donald Trump does um, have those delusions. There's been, I don't want to sidetrack here, but there is a ominous movement within the MAGA world of this so-called Red Caesar thing, and there's a lot of toxic stuff coming out of that. I would watch it carefully. Um, there isn't a lot more to say, but if you're going to come to my channel and say, "Oh no, he's not an appeaser, he doesn't support Putin," what I would argue here is it's not good enough to just condemn the invasion. It's not good enough to say he doesn't like Putin. If you're taking the position of effectively saying we shouldn't do anything about the Russian dictator and his actions, which, by the way, include um, a nerve agent attack in this country 6 years ago, which killed a British citizen. If you're going to take a position we should do nothing about that, that by definition, is appeasement. Okay, I don't know how people can claim it isn't. It's absolutely appeasement. And of course, this gets welcomed by Russian state media because Russia loves Western politicians who churn out their propaganda. You know, Russia loves Western politicians who criticize NATO and criticize Western foreign policy. And I'm not for a second saying that Western foreign policy, there should be an echo chamber and just blind agreement with it. I'm not saying that there should be absolutely no debate around Ukraine. But I draw a line with having debate and questions on these things, with going out of your way to regurgitate the propaganda of our enemies. I find that utterly reprehensible. And I have no doubt that were this 90 years ago, Farage would be saying, oh, we should try and understand Hitler. We should just, not provoke him, not provoke him. It's pathetic. I don't know if it's a lack of understanding because I don't think Farage is actually stupid. That's why I haven't necessarily called him a useful idiot. But um, I think there is a dismissal of the nature of the Putin regime because a lot of people who come out with this stuff about we should just talk to Putin, they don't get it. They don't get the nature of Putin's regime. It's based on an irredentist obsession with reclaiming the old Tsarist empire. I mean, look at the number of Ukrainian presidents there's been in the time that Putin's been in office, and then people say that Ukraine's a dictatorship. I've also had this argument, oh, Ukraine's a Nazi regime, and they point to the Azov battalion, which granted is has an unpleasant background. Of course, there is neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I've never denied that. But the people who talk about that turn a blind eye to Russian neo-Nazis, which Putin has emboldened. You know, you get these skinhead thugs who go around the streets of Russia attacking Central Asian minorities. Putin, I mean, there's a law in Russia about hooliganism, where they'll get a few years in prison, but there's absolutely a neo-Nazi subculture in Russia, and it's not just a small thing either. Putin has emboldened that. Um, so I think it's a pretty thin argument to talk about Ukrainian neo-Nazis if you're going to turn a blind eye to Russian neo-Nazis, which I would argue are on a bigger scale, it's a bigger country. Um, so I really don't care that Farage has condemned the invasion because that means little if he's simultaneously regurgitating Russian propaganda and saying it's all the fault of NATO expansion. Also, it's pure hypocrisy because Sweden and Finland have a sovereign right to choose whichever destiny they want. So Farage is basically saying, oh, NATO shouldn't expand. Finland and Sweden shouldn't have a sovereign right to decide to join NATO. Um, so much for his defense of sovereignty. In fact, that's the point I think he should be put on the spot regarding. Um, I'll wrap this up, but like I say, I probably won't censor comments here. The only time I do that is if it's, occasionally I've had particular videos covering controversial subjects where it's kind of been very personalized attacks on myself. I don't need to put up with that. And the thing is, if I look at the comments section and then I'm kind of forced to reply to those comments and defend myself, I think it's unfair on my other subscribers, because I could be corresponding with them as well. I am reluctant to block comments because I know that also cuts off people who might agree with me and support me. And also, you know, they'll accuse me of censorship. Thing is, I've heard them calling Farage a victim, oh, he's a victim of a smear campaign. I'll tell you what he isn't. He isn't poisoned. He isn't sent to prison. He's allowed to freely campaign and spout out this nonsense. I actually think Boris Johnson is right in the way he put it. So this grotesque analogy that there's no comparison with Putin's Russia at all. Um, Look at what happened to Alexei Navalny and look at Nigel Farage. He gets called some names and he's free to campaign. There's just no comparison. So I'm disgusted by Nigel Farage and any sort of sympathy I may have had for reform. They may have policies, for example, on antisocial behaviour that I would agree with. But I'm so disgusted by this position from the leader. I think it's treacherous, actually, when you consider what happened at Salisbury. I have no problem saying I think it's treacherous. Totally disgusted by it. Um, and I really hope it does damage reform a little bit. I'm not naive. I don't think it will damage them very much because I think, frankly, you know, looking at comments on the internet and people I've spoken to, reform tends to attract a few different types of people. Firstly, there's people who are genuinely just disillusioned with the big parties. And they're looking at reform, maybe they're on the centre right things, and they're looking at reform as an alternative to the Tories. And a lot of them are reasonable people. They have views that I would agree with regarding crime and so on. But there is definitely an aspect of reform voters who really tap into conspiracy theories. They tend to be, I mean, I've seen them. I've seen these sort of comments. They tend to be really on the fringe of things. And yeah, some of them are. I've seen absolute pro-Russia, pro-Putin views among them, and there is a racist element among reform voters. I've seen reform voters say we need to talk about migrants in very dehumanizing language and talk about murdering them, basically. I saw that comment a few hours ago. There is an extreme side to reform voters. And before people, get on their high horse and then demonizing them all, no, a lot of reform voters are normal people, but there is definitely an ugly underbelly there. Um, and when you have a leader who appeases Putin, is it really any wonder? So I hope this does damage reform a little bit because it's all they deserve having a leader like Farage. Um, but that's my take on it. I stand by 100% everything I've said. I don't really care if people call me names over this because I'm so disgusted by it. Um, but you know what a great country Britain is. Farage can be free to regurgitate this nonsense. Unlike Russia, where political dissidents are thrown in jail or poisoned. And that is the regime that Farage so shamefully admires. Final word. Yes, there hopefully has to be peace in Ukraine one day. I want there to be peace, but it cannot be at any price. And right now, Russia's demands just aren't realistic. Um, it's basically Ukraine should give up a huge chunk of its territory. Ukraine should never join NATO, so that's totally disregarding Ukrainian sovereignty. Um, that's preposterous. The whole premise of this invasion was Putin's disregard for Ukraine as a sovereign state. Even Farage accepted that. He said he supports sovereignty, he acknowledges Ukraine as a sovereign state. So if that's really his position, it follows then that he will accept that Putin's demands are unrealistic. But Farage is a Putin appeaser. So in a way his positions are contradictory.